Nigel Farage, thanks very much for coming to the studio. So, are you suggesting that Michael Gove should have basically ignored the legal advice of his own department by keeping these schools open?
Well, I mean, the legal advice was highly questionable. You know, there is this gap that exists, this loophole that exists within the law for a grammar school to have an overflow. Now, Weald Grammar School is just down the road from Sevenoaks, so the department could have chosen to interpret the law any way in which they wished. And I think the message that comes out from this is that the Department of Education, Michael Gove, this government will not open up the doors to selective education. And what that means is there are lots of youngsters in Sevenoaks who will not get the opportunity they'd hoped for.
And your position on grammar schools is the more the merrier?
Well, we think there should be grammar school opportunities for every single child in this country. Why do we think that? Well, 7% of people go to the private schools. They are now dominating politics, the media, sport, the public services. They're dominating the country.
You went to a private school?
I did go to a private school.
You went to Dulwich College?
I did go to Dulwich College, and you know, nearly half of my year were scholarship boys who were there being paid for on what used to be called the Assisted Places Scheme. So in a sense, I went to a super grammar school. Some paid, some didn't. But the point is, social mobility is now lower than it was 50 years ago.
But a vote for you could potentially mean that the Tories are out of power, and that means Labour gets in, and Labour is even more opposed to grammar schools than the Tories are. So if you like grammar schools, you shouldn't vote for UKIP.
Labour began the vandalism and wanton destruction of hundreds of grammar schools in the late 1960s. The Conservatives in the 70s closed even more grammar schools. So I don't think history suggests there's much there. And I would further say the idea that a vote for UKIP means that Labour will get into power actually is now being shown in the polls to be wrong. We're taking more votes. Something
so who is going to get into power?
Something like 2/3 of our votes are actually coming from non-Tory voters.
Okay.
I can't predict the outcome of 2015, but what I can say is that the UKIP voice on grammar schools is supported by a lot of people.
Let's get back to the subject then, grammar schools. So you presumably like the idea of choice, therefore you want grammar schools to flourish. But grammar schools are a choice for 25% of the school population, if not less. What about the other 65%?
Well, the argument is that because only 1 in 4 gets the opportunity of going to a grammar school, that it's unfair. I'll tell you what's really unfair. What's really unfair is there are only 164 grammar schools left in this whole country. And what is really unfair is that the 7% whose parents are rich enough are now dominating public life in Britain.
But isn't that also the point, that grammar schools are not just academically selective, they are also socially selective? That's what all the evidence suggests. So it's not just about being the brightest kids going to their schools, it's about the most fortunate kids.
The reason is that where the grammar schools have been left have been generally in the wealthier shire counties. Had we still had grammar schools in the big cities and in the poorer parts of this country, then the evidence would look very different.
But what about those kids who don't get into grammar schools? Are you saying that secondary modern schools are fine, should be left as they are? Because that's the vast population, the majority of it.
Yes, that's
right. Those are your voters.
Well, yes, and actually what we've been doing, I'm afraid mistakenly, is convincing everybody by degrading our exam results that university education is something that should be opened up to as many people as possible. We're heading towards a target of 50% going to university, and we've turned our backs as a nation on trades and skills.
In 2010, in your party manifesto, you were in favour of corporal punishment. Is that still the case?
No. I'm not.
Changed that?
I think
So
quite honestly, we argued in 2010 that headmasters should have the choice. The difficulty with that issue is it becomes a distraction from what is the real argument. And the real argument is, why are we doing so badly educationally in this country?
But isn't the other real argument that you're trying to turn the clock back to the 50s? Corporal punishment, get back to grammar schools, denying choice to the vast majority of the British public.
This country is going back to the 19th century, because what we've now got is a self-perpetuating rich who are dominating Britain in a way they weren't 50 years ago. UKIP believes in social mobility. If we go back to selective education in Britain's big cities, we will give bright kids with poor backgrounds real opportunity.
There's another fan of grammar schools called Boris Johnson, who in a rather controversial speech the other day said that there are many people in this country who are just not intelligent enough, and policy should reflect that. Do you agree with him?
I think Boris put it very indelicately.
But let's
not be ashamed of academic and intellectual elitism. Let's not be ashamed of saying that there is a percentage of this population who've got high IQs, and let's make sure they get the opportunity to become successful inventors, businessmen, and everything else. And what is currently happening is lots of our bright youngsters are not being given the chance to realise their potential.
Have you just said that you could do business with the Boris-led government? Boris-led Tory party?
I agree with Boris on some things.
What about the man behind you, here, in front of you, behind me?
I have
Michael
to say,
Gove.
I have always said...
The Tory party led by Michael Gove. Can you do business with them?
I've always said that I've admired Gove probably more than anybody else in this coalition government, which is why today I am so disappointed that Michael Gove, who's come in to try and revolutionise, as he's put it himself, British education, has turned his back and denied those children in Sevenoaks the opportunity they should have had.